would like to start
Yeah.
the PowerPoint. Okay.
Yeah, I think having the
Okay.
slides would be helpful in the conversation here. Yep.
Let Ben in or?
Yes, please.
Rebecca, if you're the host, could you allow me to share my screen? Thank
You
you.
can do anything you want, Andrea.
Thanks so much.
How do I do it? Oh, do I do it this way? Tish, can you do it?
Yeah, you want me to share my screen with the PowerPoint? Yeah, hold on just a second.
Thank you, Tish. You should have the latest version.
Rebecca, I'm glad that your skills align with my skills.
Don't make
and
fun
my
of me,
skills
Doug.
align with yours.
The button that I would hit would drop the entire call.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way.
I'm
yeah.
scared of hitting anything. But you're welcome if I make you feel better.
Already.
We got everybody.
I think we're good to go, sir.
All right. Well, look, I'll go ahead and kick it off, and I guess I'll start off by just welcoming everyone to our meeting. And I know this is a big time commitment for everybody, so I appreciate the work and, quite frankly, the sacrifice from a time standpoint we're all making. But it's important work, so I appreciate you all being here. I think everyone saw the agenda that Andrea sent out a couple of days ago. Mariah and I have been working hard with our sponsors, Jeff and Rebecca, and making sure we had a good agenda for today. I think what we want to do is just make sure we're well aligned as a steering committee before we get in front of the broader Louisville downtown revitalization team, which I believe is coming up. I think it's next week, I believe, or the week after next. So, look, the steering committee, we want to be locking arms on kind of the thinking and the work here before we get in front of the broader group and really get the heavy lifting underway. So I think what we want to do to kind of kick things off, Andrea, maybe we can go to the agenda slide really quickly here. I think that's the first slide in the packet. I think what we want to do is just really kind of, well, actually, you can stay here. What we want to do is, I think there's actually a Word document, Andrea, that kind of outlines the committee descriptions.
So Tish, if you could go to the pre-work packet. Tish is sharing her screen.
Okay. What I thought, while the team is getting that set up, what I thought we could do is just kind of go back to the conversation we had in our last steering committee and talk about the committee structure and really just make sure we're all aligned on those committees, and in particular, the descriptions of those committees, because that's going to be really important, obviously, in organizing the work. So we wanted to kind of walk through that, just make sure we all feel good about it before we start to kind of talk about next steps and other kind of things that come with that committee structure. So if we could put that up on the screen, and hopefully you had a chance to kind of read through it before this meeting, but if not, we can kind of walk through that just to make sure we're all aligned on, I think, because we had the committee names, but we didn't really have the descriptions underneath there to really talk about really what those groups would be focused on. So.
Hold on just a second. I'm trying to find the email. Okay, I can't get to it because I can't minimize because we're recording. So.
Can you just make Andrea host? Andrea, you're a co-host now. Try it. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah. No problem. Something's coming up here. So there we go. You guys see it? I can see it. Perfect. Okay. So this is the agenda. You guys have seen this. This will be what we'll cover for the next 90 minutes. So if you keep scrolling, I think the next document that's in line there, it might be oh, by the way, since we're scrolling through here, I think this is the first time we've sent out the charter with the signatures from our executive sponsors, Rebecca and Jeff. So, this is now for lack of better words, kind of etched in stone. So, we'll continue, as we continue down the path of developing the plan, we'll continue to kind of anchor ourselves in that charter that's now been signed off on. So I think that's a pretty big milestone that we have that signed off. So the document in front of you really is kind of the work of this group. In our last meeting, we had a chance to kind of refine the thinking here amongst Mariah, Rebecca, Jeff, and myself to kind of say, hey, look, what would these committees do? And we'll get into kind of, the seventh committee, because we talked about a potential seventh committee. But here are the 6 that we essentially aligned on in the last meeting. The first one being tourism, convention center, parks, hotels, and museums. And, this committee is going to focus on, what can be done to support some of the anchor institutions in downtown Louisville, amenities, tourism. So this is really a really big, important body of work. I don't want to read it to you word for word, but that's committee number 1. Marketing and communications, pretty self-explanatory in terms of what this committee is going to do. A lot of cross-functional intersections here with all the other committees. This committee is going to be focused on promoting the messaging, how we talk about what we're trying to do with optimism and positivity. So, making sure there's a group that's focused on that is going to really be key. The third one, events, art, music, sports, how do we really bring that to life in our planning to revitalize downtown? It's really core to what Louisville is when it comes to how the city is so unique. So how do we think about those elements, bringing those to life to help us revitalize downtown, to make a vibrant, engaging downtown environment? And then you have kind of these 2 committees that are focused on occupiers and how we really focus, address their concerns, their needs. You got the commercial occupiers, folks, these are businesses that are occupiers of large real estate spaces. So how do we speak to them? How do we engage them? So these are current office tenants, commercial businesses, employees that work downtown, residential occupiers. That they have to be a part of this. How do we make them a part of the solution? How do we ensure that we're thinking about the people that live downtown in many of our spaces? So that's going to be a focus area. And then number 6, we thought this was, obviously this is not commercial business. These are our small business owners, retail, food. That's a key part to the brand of Louisville. How do we bring that back to life, energize that, leverage a lot of the things we built up over the years in terms of making Louisville unique in this space? How do we make sure we focus there as well, with some short-term wins and some innovation? So these are the 6. I think we'll get into the possibility of a 7th committee once we kind of talk about the second kind of piece of the agenda, which is these downtown core services, the budget, and kind of discussing that element. But that's still, to me, a TBD. We want to talk with this committee about it. But let me stop there and just get a reaction from the group. Anyone else, Mariah, feel free to add anything, Rebecca, Jeff, but wanted to kind of make sure we were all locking arms around these committees and what these committees are focused on in the nomenclature here we're using in the document in front of you.
Douglas, I had one suggestion on the commercial occupiers. It says committee will determine ways to enhance the appeal of remaining downtown or locating in downtown. So locating in downtown would imply that we're just picking off tenants from the suburban market and moving them to downtown, which, look, I'm fine to do. But I think it also ought to, the real core is, what are we doing to bring new office occupiers to Louisville? So, instead of just trading Peter for Paul, so that's what I would suggest. That kind of gets into Rebecca's field here, so I don't want to step on her toes, but I think that's kind of that would be, an overall goal would be new rather than just relocation.
Yeah, ideally, to your point, it's about incremental growth of the metro area, downtown and the suburbs, versus just kind of swapping and trading, right? That really probably is not as good as just broader metro incremental growth of business.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good call out. So we can certainly kind of tweak the language there just a bit. What else?
I know I raised concern about this last time in terms of like racial equity. I know we're looking at everyone being trained with the racial equity tool, but I'm wondering if there still needs to be a level of accountability, because if we train everybody, what does that look like in terms of follow through and making sure that we abide by it?
Yep, completely agree. You know, and actually what I was planning to do was talk about that a bit more in Agenda 3, because I think what I'm going to propose, or I want to make sure we really talk about is.
Shut up.
Hey, you guys hearing feedback, or someone's going to speak up or say something?
Yeah,
Sorry.
somebody was unmuted. I think they're muted now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just a reminder, if you don't have to speak, just put your phone on mute. But yeah, I completely agree. We have not lost sight of that, and I think we'll get into that in a bit more detail in Section 3. And I think the thinking there is going to be, to your point, driving accountability and having a leader or leaders to ensure that happens. And quite frankly, I think I kind of said this before. I think based on the charter, us not addressing that directly in the finished product means that we didn't do it. We didn't do it the right way. So absolutely. But we will get to that. You're spot on.
Hey, Doug, this is Kendall Boyd.
Yep.
I'm sorry. I interrupted somebody. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kendall.
Oh, I was just going to say, in that same breath, we also have a fair housing equity assessment. If we're talking about residents returning downtown and people that are going to live and work downtown, it's got to be quality, affordable, fair housing availability as well. So we can make that part of the equity discussion.
Okay, a fair housing kind of assessment or conversation.
Fair housing assessment is part of the overall equity discussion. Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, what I was going to say, Douglas, is kind of what Kendall is talking, but we've got this ongoing discussion with homeless, and what I see is they just 1 week they're on Main Street, the next week they just have gotten shuffled over to 2nd Street. So it's just we're constantly moving them around. Mm-hmm. That's not a solution for them, and it's really not a solution for downtown. So somehow that needs to be addressed, and it shouldn't be that we just want to move the homeless out of downtown. It's where, how is the city going to develop something where those homeless can go and be safe? Because I'm pretty sure that constantly moving them around doesn't help anybody, especially them. So we need to have something. That may be a bigger question than what this task force is, but I think we need to have that in the back.
No, I agree. And I think going to that point, Doug, this might, Rebecca, keep me honest here. When we get into these core services, I think we as a committee need to, I want to make sure we're aligned on how we are going to talk about it and how we're going to address it. And it's clear whether it's in these committees or whether it's in the core services, that to me, we need to kind of talk about how we're going to stay connected to what the city is going to do, what they're committed to doing. And if there's a gap, could that be the 7th committee? But Doug, to your point, we need to talk about this in the right way. Even I think the email that was attached to the note that Andrea sent out, and going back to the conversation we had as a group in our last steering committee around most of the folks who are homeless are Louisvillians or part of the metro area. So they're a part of the fabric that we're here to support as well. And how do we do that in the right way? So there's not a silver bullet, but we certainly can't ignore it or just say we're going to push them over here. That doesn't solve anything. And quite frankly, we lose credibility if we don't address that the right way. So completely agree with you there. But I want to make sure let's agree to talk about that one maybe in the next phase of the agenda. Let's just make sure we cover that in the right way. And quite frankly, we got to commit to talking about that in the right way as a committee too. So completely, we have to make sure we kind of focus on that. So, okay. What else?
I think just to wrap up the committee conversation before we move forward to the core services conversation that's next on the agenda, just kind of, so the goal from here forward is we've got the committees. We need to have people in this group kind of raise their hands for which committees they want to be involved in. If there's something you want to lead, we need to hear about that. I think Andrea has a Google Docs kind of sign up sheet that will be sent around after this meeting. That needs to happen between now and the meeting on Monday, which is the overall downtown revitalization meeting. And then in those first 1 to 2 committee meetings, what we're really looking for is kind of a rapid iteration of determining SMART goals for the next 30, 60, 90 days, determine what resources are needed in order to meet those goals. So time, talent, treasure, data, what needs to happen in order to get there. How is the committee addressing D&I within those goals? And again, we'll have a larger conversation about that piece of it further on in the agenda today. And then really taking those high priority long-term issues that are really beyond 180 days and putting them in a parking lot so that we can figure out where do we find a home for them in the future. So does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, it does.
And to Mariah's point, you know, and we talked about this a little bit, we really see members of the steering committee raising their hand and being committee leaders, because a good portion of, and Mariah, keep me honest here, a good portion of this meeting going forward with the steering committee group is going to be you all as a steering committee / also committee leaders coming back, discussing what the team is talking about, making sure we're integrated, we're not overlapping or being redundant. So, you know, for you all to raise your hand and kind of say, hey, I have an interest in this particular committee is really going to be important. I think ideally, we would love to kind of understand that even before we get in front of the broader downtown development committee, that we understand who's probably going to be leading this work up. So if you have an interest, let us know. Okay.
And I think just, I'm happy, I'm speaking on behalf of Jeff, probably Rebecca Matheny, but we're happy to fill in wherever you guys don't. I mean, if there are some that aren't filled in, so I'm not going to volunteer to head one up, but happy to do so. Just want to make sure that you guys are, steering committee folks are there if they want to be.
Quick question. So I understand that anyone on the broader committee can join one of these steering committees, and I would really like someone from GLI to be on every one of the committees, not leading it, but just involved. So should I add those names when you send out the list, or is that something that will come later?
That's a good question. Anyone can be on the full team, so we can send out invitations now, because I think the order of process, and I don't want to get out of order with Mariah or Douglas, but I think we will be, once we know who will be from the steering committee heading up each of these committees, taking this next week to the full committee and letting everybody sign up wherever they want to participate. So if you want to go ahead and let your folks know which ones they want to be on, I think we can accommodate that, or we can actually include them on the list of the full revitalization team.
Yeah.
And Sarah, that's really up to you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll send that. I'm sorry, Doug.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I think once we had the broader Louisville downtown revitalization team raise their hands on what committees they want to be involved with, I think what we talked about is we would probably ask them to give, hey, what's your option 1? What's your option 2? What's your option 3? Because we want to have balance, right? You know, we want to make sure we have the proper balance across those committees. So we'll try our best to make sure your first choice is the committee that you get, but we don't want to guarantee that, because we want to make sure there's balance, and we're thinking about, you know, so I think that's kind of, if you're wondering kind of how we're going to do it, we're going to give people options to say, hey, give me your top 3, and then we'll kind of on the back end kind of figure out how to create that balance, but try to get as close to your number 1 or number 2 pick as possible.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Rebecca Matheny put something here in the chat. I'll just read it. I think you guys saw it come up on your screens, but it's a great point, and I want to make sure we come back to this. There are multiple committees on homeless and street behavior issues concern this, since it really isn't a 180-day issue, may just add to the confusion. So, you know, Rebecca, it's, you know, going back to the point we made in the last meeting, we want to stay true to the charter. Again, thinking about things that we can address here in the short term versus the long term. So you're absolutely right, which is why I think what we said is we want, you know, how do we make sure that the city and their role in this, we understand that, and we're not trying to take on things that are really not part of the charter. So you're absolutely right. So whatever we decide to do in this space, we want to make sure it stays true to the charter, but we're staying linked to the city and understanding what they're doing as well. But we gotta be cautious about not doing things that really don't align back to the charter. And that really, to me, the thing we gotta really kind of wrestle with is things that we can have an impact on in 2021. So it's a good point. But anything, Rebecca, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to, and I'll say, just reiterate kind of what Mariah's already pointed out. We do not want people to feel like they can't bring up ideas that would extend past the work of this committee. And I do want to keep kind of like a parking lot of those bigger ideas because they should go live somewhere else. I keep saying it will probably be Louisville Metro and or Louisville Downtown Partnership. But I do want to make sure that those all are addressed. Homeless, we know, are addressed. Vincent James, Chief James, is on the full revitalization team meeting. He can talk to the full group when there are updates. But I agree that would probably be duplicative if we had a committee on homelessness. And to your point, it's past the charter.
Yeah, I think my concern, and I just think we need to have it somewhere, is that I think what we have to say is that the downtown business community is never going to be acceptive of homelessness throughout downtown. So there's always going to be a push, I think, from the business community against a large homeless presence. Now, that is what it is. But the key point is it's not acceptable to just shove them out of downtown. Like, so it's I'm afraid that if we just have it, or if we don't address it, then all this committee is going to do is say, okay, we can't have homeless in the downtown core, which is really not the issue. It's, are we going to find a place to put them and give them safety?
And Doug, I don't want anyone to think that it's not being addressed.
No, I wasn't implying that. I didn't mean
and there's
to.
a lot of work going into that. I know, I just want to be clear. And I know what you're saying. So that's why I think it would be good for Chief James to update this group every so often about what is going on so that people do feel like there is action being taken. And that should live on that longer term parking lot.
Right.
Yeah, and I talked to Chief James a little bit over the last week, and I know they're reinstituting the homeless task force. And so there's a whole nother body of people that are working specifically on that issue. And I mean, ultimately, we just need to figure out how we make sure we're on the same page between the two groups, I think.
Exactly. What's going to be key here is making sure that the work that's happening, there's awareness with this group on that work, because the work there would obviously, we want to make sure that that work is connected and folks understand kind of what's happening already as we build out the plans for the committee. So to Rebecca's point, we want to make sure we have some type of cadence where we're getting an update on what's happening in that space. So we'll make sure we do that. Okay.
I think that's the perfect kick over to Rebecca and Jeff and them on kind of talking about the downtown core services that are in place right now.
Yep.
Okay, so this is what you're looking at is a little bit. Is this the new one? Wow, Andrew, you're good. I just sent this to her an hour ago. Thank you. So I just wanted to. This is kind of just a long list of the things that, and I kind of separated it into what we already do, what's new but has been completed, what's new and ongoing, and then as we go down the page, you'll see where there might be activities that we could do or at least could make recommendations about. So Rebecca Matheny is working on overlaying this with what LDMD does, because I think it's important to see what's done in downtown, and it doesn't really matter, I don't think, to the public in terms of what Metro does versus what LDMD does. But just to get a fuller picture, I think there will be more that's added to this page. But I'll go ahead and walk you through this. Basically, SWIMS is solid waste management, and what they do in downtown. 3 days a week, they do street sweeping, they collect garbage 7 days a week, and then hotspot litter collections as they see it daily. Codes and regs, there's graffiti. And I'll tell you what I do, rather than just reading this all to you. Basically, I wanted to show what's being done, what we know is in a budget or has been budgeted for these items. And if we don't know what the budget, or if there hasn't been a budget, I should say, we're trying to find that unit cost. So if we do want to add that, if that's something that comes out of any of these committees, that we are able to say, we know we need X number of dollars that will get us X number of streetlights or whatever, whatever that piece of thing is. Public Works, they do work on streetlights, repaving the roads and the sidewalks, traffic signs, traffic signals, and street furniture. And then Brightside does cleanups. And maybe you guys just saw, we put out a press release today about trying to get folks or volunteering for a give a day. And I think that this kind of cleanup would be really good for downtown. And I think we could get a lot of folks from our revitalization team involved in this. I would love to see one in the spring. Brightside usually does this in the spring, like right after thunder cleanup and downtown, generally sprucing up green areas and picking up litter. And then again, I think in the summer, as folks are coming back to work, another concerted effort. That's just Rebecca Flyshaker speaking. New and complete, we do have a brand new MOA between Metro and Louisville Downtown Partnership. I think the first one was in 2010. So that is for maintaining city-owned stuff, and that's just good. It makes it official now. And then I've got a couple of budget numbers for you of some things that we were able to do in the last couple of years for new trash cans and kind of sprucing up light poles and the pedestrian signal heads. That's where it says don't walk or walk. It's not the actual street lights. I've learned a lot of stuff from Public Works in the last week or so. We do have on board Rob Lush as the new Clean Collaborative Coordinator. So this was part of the mid-year adjusted budget to hire somebody who would oversee a lot of this stuff. And that's countywide, but we're trying to, again, focus in on downtown and trying to break apart some of these costs for what is going on in downtown. And Rob has an operational budget in Public Works, or maybe it's SWIM, sorry, but his position is newly created with new funds. And then new and ongoing, I've included both Downtown Strong campaign and the new yet to come out Lou Needs You campaign. And there's some homelessness stuff you'll see here. And this is stuff we're going to keep track of. So I'm putting it here so that we can see it, including Clean Collaborative since it's new. And then just some questions of things we've heard about potential grant programs, additional trees maybe, more cleanups, more deep clean cleanups, that kind of thing. And then I broke down the that background on the MOA between the city and LDP, since that might be in the weeds, but sometimes we get asked those kinds of questions. And I know Rebecca's on here. She can answer anything you guys have about that, but I just trying to provide as much clarity around what exists now and what might be able to exist in the future. That was really down and dirty and fast. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Is there a way that street paving and street repairs could exist after hours instead of at rush hour?
Well, that might depend on a lot of overtime, Doug.
Yeah, that's just, I mean, that's a big ding on downtown, is the traffic repairs that happen during rush hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna add something here, which is like, it depends on who's doing it too, because there's Metro street paving, which is routine, but the biggest thing that I think Metro grapples with, and we grapple with all the time, is the utilities and their folks who are completely out of control. And we've been working with Public Works and with Coach and Regs to get that under a little bit better under control, because Doug, they actually, that potentially could happen much more effectively out of time. But they will also only do it if there's like a massive amount to do. They don't do little bits at a time.
The other thing that we have to be careful of, because we ran into this in some of our projects, is downtown didn't have a lot of residents for such a long time that everybody did everything overnight. So then when we started bringing residents downtown and MSDs tearing up the street at 3 a.m., it wasn't great for the people that were living in the building. So we got—
That's a good point. Yeah.
Users versus the overnight users.
All right, that's a good point.
Area.
So 10 to 2, they can work from 10 to 2. AM to PM.
Exactly.
Well, look, I think the reason we wanted to bring this forward to the group was because a lot of the things that we talked about as a steering committee that were needed to revitalize downtown, we were saying, okay, should that be what this group does, or is the city handling it? And what Rebecca walked through is basically a list of the things that the city has budget dollars for to handle. I mean, we obviously talked about homelessness quite a bit, cleanup, so there's a lot of stuff that's in here. And I think there's kind of two questions I wanted to kind of talk about. One is just kind of getting agreement and alignment on how this group is going to stay connected to the progress being made in this space, so that we all can feel good about, hey, it's not on a piece of paper, it's actually happening. But then two, is there anyone that feels just like, wow, there's something in here that's not here for whatever reason, that says we should address this somehow in some type of seventh committee, right? Because there was cleanup and just kind of beautification of downtown, homelessness. We talked, so there's a lot of stuff. So is there a gap here where we need to say, hey, we need to kind of talk about doing something different here or incremental to what's here that would constitute a seventh committee? So it's kind of two questions in my mind. Is there a gap, one, and then two, agreement on how we stay connected to this, but again, not being redundant, because the message here is there's somebody already addressing it, and that's the city.
And I'm also open to, if it's something that's up here, but we need more of, that this would be a recommendation for more budget towards that.
The only thing that comes to mind, and I'm not certain if we're looking at the overall committee in general as volunteers, but I'm thinking with some of the things that we may implement, we might need someone to coordinate volunteers. Does that?
Do you mean for the cleanups, Tawana?
Just for everything, right? Like if, say, for instance, we take on several new initiatives and we recognize even with the bandwidth of the committee, we need someone to put out a call for volunteers, train the volunteers so that they are doing things in line with our vision. Just a volunteer committee or chair or someone that can be kind of the touch point for anybody outside of the overall committee who might want to get involved in helping on executing some of the initiatives that come out of this.
Tawana, this is Rebecca, the other one, mature Rebecca. I think that's a great idea, because when we were overwhelmed by volunteers kind of in the wake of some of the stuff that happened in the spring, we turned to the United Way, and what they basically do is a volunteer bank, and then they farm it back out to other organizations. And our organization has 6 people. We can't manage that. So I think the idea, and there were so many people that wanted to do so many good things. I think that's a brilliant idea.
And Brightside is set up to do that, Tawana. So I think it would depend on what events we would need volunteers for. I mean, there is a proposed events committee. I don't know how often we would be called to do the volunteering. Of course, we would be putting the word out as each of us as a team member to folks to volunteer for something, but I don't know that I know the answer, but Brightside does do that too.
I think that's definitely something the committees need to identify as part of that resourcing requirements for the goals that they meet, so that it can be figured out. Because I agree, I think it might be different depending upon what kind of volunteers we're looking for, depending upon what the initiative is.
Councilman Arthur had a question in the chat.
But one of the Rebeccas speak to the intentionality behind how we're supporting local businesses. It's not mentioned in the committees, of course. I don't think in the charter either. I'm just wondering if there's any place where that could live and have some intention behind supporting those local businesses.
There is a retail and restaurant committee, which I think is for that. Actually, it was Mariah's brainchild, and I thought it was a really good addition. I think that's what Mariah was thinking of. And then there's the commercial occupier. I don't know if that's the word, but businesses too. Is that what you mean, Councilman? Yes, I think being able to help businesses is very important.
Right. I'm specifically talking about local businesses though, because even in retail and restaurant businesses, you can have these mega chains that have support from their national entities. But the local businesses, as you know, we just saw with another sandwich shop, a 50-year local business that just closed because they couldn't afford to stay open anymore. So I'm asking about where's the intentionality behind supporting local businesses, not just dumping them into the overall retail and restaurant business committee because they could get lost in the sauce, if you know what I mean.
So I think we might need to add some verbiage to that committee to make it specific, but when I think about the vast majority of the retail and restaurant and first floor businesses in downtown are local businesses. I think the chains are more of the exception, not the rule. So the intention with this committee was definitely to help those smaller retail, restaurant, first floor local businesses that I know are struggling and that need help to stay in place. So,
but some of the national businesses are franchises and they're owned by a local franchisee. So even though they've got a national name behind them, it's a local owned business. So I think we have to be careful and picking and choosing between what we're supporting and what we're not. I kind of favor just supporting all downtown retail businesses.
I guess one other thought is if you look at the 6 committees that are listed, if each one of these committees is successful, local businesses downtown will benefit. I mean, if tourism and convention and hotels, if that committee is successful, if arts, music, and sports is successful, the residential occupiers, if we're all successful in those various committees, downtown businesses, locally owned and otherwise, will all benefit, I would think.
Yeah.
So I disagree with both of you. I completely disagree with both of you. Doug, you just talked about everyone getting the same of everything after we just talked about equity. Equity is giving people what they need to succeed, and giving everyone the same of everything doesn't make any sense when we have limited resources. And then going to what Dan said about this trickle down economy, that doesn't work. This business that I just referred to closed, and they were, given promises from people like the convention center, and they never got any support. In fact, they got nothing but big invoices in terms of marketing and whatnot. So I'm just asking if we're going to have intentionality behind it. And it sounds like the answer is no. And Mariah, if you created this for small businesses in mind, I think we should put small in front of retail and restaurant businesses so that this committee knows what they're working on. Otherwise, they'll just be kind of floating in thin air.
I like that addition. I think that's a good addition.
I
think a lot of the retail businesses that I've talked to in downtown that are struggling because there are no businesses and there's no people in downtown, and they can't get, they're not able to sell because there's nobody to sell to. But I mean, personally, I think it's a dangerous road if we say, look, we're going to support this and not that. And well, Heine Brothers, they're local, but they're a big chain versus Sangeros, so like for me, I don't think that's what we should be doing, but
it's not either or. What I'm saying is that we just know there's emphasis behind making sure we're supporting our homegrown local businesses that don't have any support outside of Louisville, Kentucky. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying you don't support the franchises at all. That's a different conversation for the committee. I'm just saying local isn't mentioned, small business isn't mentioned, and we're talking about downtown Louisville, and we want them to be successful.
Yeah.
I think what we could do, I think it's a good point. I think what we could do possibly is talk about a focus on those that are most in need, which my guess would be local businesses, but that also doesn't exclude anyone else. But to me, when I read the sentence, this committee will prioritize the perspectives of these constituencies and ongoing challenges. And I think about the ongoing challenges are, to the councilman's point, I think we can sharpen our pencil there potentially to say, hey, look, that's the priority. Doesn't mean others don't get it, but how do we prioritize where the most need is? And when I read it, that's kind of how I read it. But if we can sharpen our pencil there, I think that makes a lot of sense. But it doesn't.
Yeah, we don't have time to leave it. Yeah, we don't want to leave that open for interpretation. So I say you add small businesses or add whatever you need to add, but we don't want them to get lost in this.
All right, anything else? So we can add that language to sharpen the focus here.
Yeah, I want
To
to,
make sure, yeah, go ahead.
I agree with Councilman. I definitely think that there needs to be some emphasis in them knowing up front that we want to
Mhm.
prioritize small. But I want to go back to the volunteer committee. And I do understand that Bright Side, that's a service that they provide. Where my mind goes is many people are already busy, and whatever initiatives come out of these various committees, to ask them to then also build their volunteer strategy and also manage volunteers, I think it's a heavy task. Versus if you have a committee that serves to funnel volunteer requests and needs and then work with Brightside and identifying them and answering volunteer questions, I think would make things more streamlined. My biggest concern is asking them, people leading and working on committees, to also manage a group of volunteers on top of making sure that whatever they're executing is successful. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I think it's more of a bandwidth thing as opposed to whether we're overlapping with another organization.
I completely agree, Tawana. I mean, because we've grappled with that so much. I think having a group of people from the private sector doing that would be fabulous resource.
So Tawana, are you suggesting that we have basically a 7th committee that's a volunteer coordination committee that really takes on this piece?
Yes.
Okay.
And that group would be really their purpose, make sure I understand this, it would be to start to bring together folks who are raising their hands, wanting to address a number of issues happening downtown. That would be, for example, the resources that group gathers could volunteer to do work in this particular space, retail and small business. It could be some of the other committees, but we would take those volunteers and kind of funnel them into the various things that we're trying to do. Essentially, it could be a number of things, but not just one thing, not just beautification. It could be other things as well, right?
Yeah, so essentially every committee chair and committee members would know that if your committee is falling short, needing extra hands, direct your volunteer needs to this specific committee, and they will work with the partners, Brightside, whomever else it is, to post, communicate. And then also in the event that volunteers are interested, rather than the various leaders being inundated with requests, those requests to participate or to help out come in through one committee, and they align and point people in the right direction, and even hold, maybe quarterly or monthly, whatever that might be, training sessions, so on and so forth. Because sometimes volunteers can go rogue, right? And if you don't really have a group that's providing oversight and keeping them in line with what our mission is, I think it could just become overwhelming for us.
Yep. No, it's a great point. I'm just, it's a fantastic point. Do we, from a charter standpoint, I want to make sure, because I think Tawana, keep me honest here. Part of me is thinking the volunteers would get into the implementation of what we're trying to do from a committee, that they're going to help bring this to life, because there's work that has to be done and they got to help bring it to life. And I think part of what we're also looking for this group to do, and I'm going back to, I'm asking the question, some of the folks that are going to be volunteering and raising their hand as a part of the broader downtown development or downtown revitalization team, we're going to be asking them to help with some of the implementation, right? That's the spirit of what we're trying to get at, I think in the charter. Is that, and I'm asking that to Rebecca and Jeff as our executive sponsors, is that kind of aligned to the purpose and what the charters kind of states?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't think that I had originally thought of that as being part of what this group would be charged with doing.
Implementation.
I kind of see it as being like a 1B thing, like it might be a need that comes out of a committee that then would have to be considered for where we would who that body is that would call for, I mean, because it really does depend what that event is or what the need for the volunteers is. You don't go to Brightside for everything that you might want to volunteer for. So I guess I would just want to know what's coming out of these committees before we'd even know. I don't want to take, 20 people off of our revitalization team to be waiting around to, find out what needs to be done. But again, Tawana, I like the idea. I just am not really sure I understand. Maybe none of us can understand at this point what those volunteer needs would be.
Yeah, and we wouldn't, right? I think it would almost be like, for example, a steering committee member could say, hey, I will serve as lead the volunteer committee, and even begin just building out, how do people go about saying they want to volunteer? And then for the steering committee chairs over the various committees, what is the process for communicating as these things develop, what your volunteer needs are?
Yeah.
So I don't think you need to have a ton of people join that committee at first, but I think having somebody begin thinking about our volunteer strategy, and if it's not at the committee level, I think it just needs to be built into our plan.
No, that's a good, I wonder what we could do, Rebecca, is, I'm iterating here just a bit on this thought now. I think there's going to be some people who are going to say, hey, thanks for allowing me to kind of volunteer to do the planning of this. But, and some will say, hey, I'm happy with planning, I'm done, walk away. Others are going to say, I actually want to, I want to keep going with this because I want to make sure it actually happens.
Well,
that's my guess. And I'm wondering, could this be the next, to your point, evolution? Because I think that will happen with a lot of the folks that are on the team. And I think we need to kind of understand who those folks are so we can continue to kind of engage them to help us with implementation. I know it's kind of outside the scope of the original charter, but I think it's naturally going to happen.
I would agree with that. And I also am envisioning it could be something like GLI's ambassadors, where you've got folks that are signed up to do something and they're called on when needed, and you don't always know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I may have not read the charter right, but I always thought that, this revitalization committee really needed to be involved in implementing some of the things that came out, because we're talking about short term, what are we going to get done? And the more I think about what Tawana is talking about, I think it'd be a really key piece to making sure that we can move quickly once, we get kind of our ducks in a row. And I've already had multiple people come to me and ask, I heard you're on this committee, let me know what I can do to help. So being able to say, great, we have this volunteer coordinator, like let them know what you're interested in, and we can then be more coordinated with how we engage with people.
Yeah. How about this?
And
oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, in Mariah, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, as I said the last meeting, I don't think that the planning or the strategic projects here are rocket science. I think the problem with our community is we don't have people to implement. Dayton does, Columbus does. We have people who pick up the banner. And so when we talk about volunteers, we aren't talking about people who are going to spread mulch. I'm thinking, and I love Tawana's idea, because I'm thinking it's like, really, if you want to help and you have a skill set, here's a project that needs to get done. And that's what I think needs to happen out of this whole initiative, is how we get people to do that. And I'm going to continue to beat that drum. So I really do like Tawana's thing. But again, this is not about maybe it is about mulch this spring. And this is why Brightside is absolutely not the right organization to do this, and why we really need a private sector leader to help coordinate GLI's folks and our business leaders to do projects.
So how about we do this? I think this should be a key topic for our next steering committee, in terms of, I think Rebecca, what maybe I'm hearing the group say is there could be I think there's going to be this natural evolution of people that are going to say, there'll be one camp that'll say, I signed up to do this until May. I'm ready to kind of get off the ship of the planning piece. There'll be another group that's going to say, I want to stay engaged and actually do. Okay, thanks for the thought leadership. I want to implement and execute. And how do we really kind of tap into that, harness that energy and kind of put it to use? And that might be the phase 2, or it might be another thing or committee. I don't know, but I think we should try to capture those who want to be a part of bringing it to life and figure out how we kind of organize that body of work and think about how we kind of gather those names. So
I agree. I like that
okay.
idea. That
Okay.
fits too.
Okay. All right. So Tawana, we'll come back to that one in our next steering committee and talk about how we want to go about doing that. But it's a great point. Okay. Okay. I think we should go to the next topic here, and that is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm going to go back to Councilman Arthur's comments around I&D, and this is kind of, I think we're going to have a conversation around the racial equity toolkit. But here's what I would propose to the group. And that other chart that I showed in our last committee had an arrow kind of saying we're going to weave in inclusion and diversity and equity through all of the committees that we formed, the 6 committees here. You know, what I'd propose is that we do have either an individual or a group that ensures and they're integrated along the way, so that we don't kind of get to the end and find out we didn't meet the mark. That we have a group that is a part of this steering committee. And I know, Councilman, you raised your hand in the last meeting saying you wanted to play that role. I think we need to have that, and we need to make sure that that group is empowered. They have a voice in this committee, and they're holding all of us accountable to making sure that the final plan is one that's inclusive, is one that's diverse, is one that talks about equity, and is done in a meaningful way. I don't think it's a committee per se. I think it's a body, a group that's here, and they're going to ensure that, because quite frankly, again, if we can't demonstrate that, we're not aligned to the charter. And quite frankly, we've missed the mark. So want to propose that, and I know we talked about that a little bit in our last meeting, but I want to kind of get galvanized around that approach.
I'm happy to take lead on it. I would also suggest that maybe we don't train everyone, because I know we have limited time, limited resources. And to be frank, not everyone cares about this. I obviously care about it. I've spoken out, but you know, just from our few calls we've had, hearing people talk about top to bottom approach, hearing people talk about giving everyone equal, like not everyone is going to prioritize this. So training them in it, you know, you're 40, 50, 60 years old. If you don't get this by now, training you in a racial toolkit is a waste of their time and a waste of our time. So I think we pick the people who really care about it. We get them to hold the group accountable. They create their own SMART goals around DE&I, and we push forward.
Any other thoughts?
It just needs to be included in part of what we do. I mean, it just is a paradigm shift of America, and we have to be very intentional about it.
All right. Anything else? Okay. Well, how about we do this? Go ahead, Kendall. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, I'm happy to help out as well. I've helped develop the Metro's toolkit, and I've trained on the toolkit. So I'm happy to help out in any way that I can around training on the toolkit, utilization of the toolkit.
Okay.
Plus results-based accountability as well.
Okay. So how about this?
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and we certainly need somebody who is speaking for the non-minority community that feels that this is, or who is not a person of color. That's something that I think is incredibly important, that we find somebody who can speak to this issue in a very articulate way, that is somebody who isn't as impacted directly by it, and I think that's very important.
Okay. So Councilman Arthur, it sounds like you have it. You have the role of making sure that were you thinking about having a few other people with you to help do that as well?
Yeah, but I can't force people to speak up and say they care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Rebecca Matheny is exactly right. Kendall Boyd jumped on it, but we two Black men. So is there anyone else who cares about this that's willing to hold the rest of the groups accountable for making sure we see this through?
With all
Not to,
respect, Councilman, you just told a couple of people on the committee they weren't.
Well, Doug, we know it's not.
beyond
We
this.
know it's not going to be you, Doug. So you can just mute yourself and keep pushing. We know it
I
won't be you. So can
I
someone
find
else
that
speak up and say
extremely-
they want to be about it?
I find that extremely offensive. And it is
Doug,
something
I don't
I'm
care what
interested
you
in.
find offensive, bro. My great grandparents used to be slaves. You don't get to talk to me about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I
Bye.
wasn't trying to.
We don't need to hear from you anymore. You don't care about this. I ask for anyone who cares about it. If you don't care about it, then move on. And if anybody wants to hit me up about it in private and you care, then do that. But I don't want to hear from anybody who doesn't care about it. What's the point of us even having an exchange right now?
But personally, you're saying that I don't care.
I don't care how you
don't
feel
know me.
personally, Doug.
No,
We're
no,
not talking
you're
about
saying
your
that I don't
personal
care.
feelings. We're talking about people outside of this, a collective of people who are impacted about what we're discussing. I don't care about your personal feelings. Let's move on.
Yeah, hey, how about we do this? So Councilman Arthur, to your point, if you don't mind reaching out to others who you think might have an interest in this, but you have the role of making sure you're holding this group accountable at this level to ensure that the committees and what they're bringing forward is equitable, diverse, inclusive, because that's what the charter asks us to do. So I do just want to, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, again, I don't know everyone. So whoever
Okay.
cares about it can contact me. Obviously, it won't be Doug Owen, but I'm just saying whoever cares about it can hit me up and say they want to be a part of it.
Okay.
I do want to be sure that we have an open forum here, because if somebody is willing to talk about it, who may have different opinions, I think that's important, because this is, like I said, I think it's just it needs to be open and talked about, and could be a shift for somebody.
Does anyone else have a perspective or wants to help with that important body of work?
And Douglas, I'll go ahead and say that I think as we have our staff members supporting the work, they'll be the ones working through the racial equity toolkit on the things that come out. So I think from our standpoint, from the Rebecca and my standpoint, I mean, we'll have our teams that are helping with that work throughout.
Okay. All right. I did want to quickly go over it because I'm not familiar with the toolkit. I don't consider it training, but I did want to introduce it just so I can get familiar with, and it's on the agenda here. So I do want to quickly touch on it. Kendall, is that something you can kind of walk through really quick as an introduction? I'm not sure if I want to call it training, but I think we should at least introduce it, because maybe I'm the only person that's never seen it before, but I would love just to kind of talk to it quickly.
Could someone put back up the 6 steps that were on the screen, please? Again, this is a very, very basic overview. It's a 6-step process, but the actual toolkit itself has accountability measures built in, and then it has a check the box system as to what it is that we're addressing. Is it a policy decision? Is it a budget decision? Is it an administrative decision? So forth and so forth. And when you start at step 1, we're talking about gathering your key stakeholders and those who are going to be impacted by the work. Similar to when I spoke earlier about the fair housing toolkit, it's in the same vein. You've got to have a community outreach. You've got to have community stakeholders who are going to be impacted by the work. If you don't start there, then it's kind of pointless. There it is. Thank you. It's kind of pointless to do this work if you're not going to be doing community outreach and being very intentional about this work. So again, that's step 1, setting your vision and outcomes. When you go into step 2, we're talking about, again, involving your stakeholders, gathering your data. So for example, when I spoke about downtown living and fair housing in downtown, and again, I'm using this kind of interchangeably because I think this is a great example. When we're gathering data on who lives downtown, I think somebody earlier in the conversation mentioned someone like, the homeless population. Okay, that's one population, but what about the individuals who live downtown, who work downtown, who can't afford work downtown, but can't afford to live downtown? Again, that's one of your stakeholders. That's how you have to gather data around those groups of people. Your population data, is this going to be young people? Is it going to be middle-aged people? Is it going to be older adults? What are your demographics? So forth and so forth. So that would be your step 2. To me, step 2 is kind of the most important step, because again, that's where you're going to determine your equitable impact.
When you go to step 3, again, we're talking about the benefits and the burden. So if we're going to revitalize downtown, that's an excellent idea. But then who are we going to kick out of downtown if we're going to invest a lot of money in economic development and moving forward? There's going to be someone that's going to be excluded as a result of those activities. So how do you lessen that burden, and how do you ensure that the benefit reaches the greatest amount of the population? When you jump to step 4, you advance the opportunity, but at the same time, you minimize the harm. So in the decisions that you've made in step 3 and step 4, you're actually moving that forward. Step 5, you're evaluating your decisions. Keep in mind that when you're going through this toolkit, these steps are very fluid. If you realize an inequitable impact, let's say in step 4, step 5, it's no harm in going back to step 1. Always remember that there's no harm in going back to make sure that you're either amending your vision, you're amending your outcome, or you've included more stakeholders in your approach. So you evaluate, you communicate, so forth and so forth. And then part 6 is the results-based accountability and report backs as to what impact that you've had. I would recommend using this toolkit early and often. I would also recommend, with respect to your report out and your results-based accountability, that those measures match your intentionality in steps 1 and steps 2. If you don't do that, you're not casting the widest net to have the most equitable impact. And so, again, that's it in a nutshell. This toolkit training usually lasts about 3 to 4 hours, depending on the audience. But I just want to kind of give everyone an overview of how this toolkit works, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick on the housing thing and just say that we have all those numbers, and we're probably really odd. We're not probably really odd. I know for a fact we're very odd in terms of downtown because we have so much. So when we talk about affordable housing, I hate that word because it's very loaded. And we have so much quote unquote affordable, meaning assisted housing in downtown, that our numbers are actually out of the roof in terms of who we house downtown, who are low income, who are minority households. And we all know that that is not, that's all about what kinds of housing we have downtown. So I think that when you talk about these things in aggregate, like getting into it in a very fine-grained way is what's most important. Because if you exclude Dosker and Beecher returning the way that Beecher's going to return, and if you exclude Liberty Green, you get a very different viewpoint. What we are losing downtown is naturally affordable units. And that is my biggest concern, is we're losing naturally affordable units versus assisted units. So, and like, can we please just, dear God, not talk about affordable in that way, because affordable really does have a connotation.
Yeah, I mean, it's the intent of the toolkit to take that sort of negative connotation away from affordable, because I mean that term is a relative term. In the fair housing world, I know the minute someone says fair affordable housing, people think all of a sudden vouchers and things like that. That's not what fair affordable housing is. So it's up to people like us to change that narrative to say, not only are we talking about assisted living, we're talking about housing where people who work at TGI Fridays or work at Wendy's can still afford to live downtown, so they don't have to take 2 buses to work every day. So
Yeah,
we've
dude,
got to change that narrative.
I did public housing for 15 to 20 years. That narrative is not changing by us trying to change it. We've got to come up with different language.
Any other questions on the toolkit?
So Kendall, so I want to make sure that the group understands kind of what we're looking to do here. Would the ideal be that every committee in the beginning, kind of before they kind of get launched, go through that training, or how do we plan to kind of make sure that the committees are aware, exposed, trained, call it what you want, so that as the ideation starts, this is already a part of the thinking here? What's the thinking around that?
Right. the earlier, the better.
Mhm.
That if equity is going to be at the core of the work that you're doing, then you need to be trained on this before we even start to map out, strategize about what this work form look like.
Okay. So I think, as we identify committee leaders, that I think that first meeting, or that this is a big, or however, I think very early on, we want to make sure that at least, this has to be done early on before the work starts, the committees. So just want to make sure that we talk about that, we say that, and that this becomes a part of one of the things you're going to have to do as committee leaders, is ensure that this takes place within the committee. Because again, we want to make sure that there's accountability in making sure that the final plans are diverse, equitable, and inclusive. So, okay.
If you recall, for the B3T effort with Jeff O'Brien's on here as well, we did the equity training at the beginning of the B3T work this past summer. So that's how critically important it is to the work.
Okay. All right, anything else?
Since we already have, another steering committee meeting planned in 2 weeks from today, do we want to capture that to really do a deep dive into this training with the committee leaders that are identified at that point, and anyone else from the overall revitalization committee?
And this, is it a 4 hour? Is it 4 hours? Is that what I heard? How long is the training?
Pare it down to 3 hours. I want to make sure that everyone has opportunity to answer questions, run through scenarios and things like that. So it is a time commitment, and I understand everybody's busy. I totally get that, but to be the most impactful, you have to have the most comprehensive training that you can.
Yeah, I don't think it's a negotiable for us. I think we have to do it. So I think, Mariah, I think we should think about that. We should, yeah, I think we should do it. But go ahead. Someone's going to say something.
Douglas, I was just going to say that I think that, at a minimum, we would have our committee leaders and our staff members, who some of them have already been trained on the racial equity toolkit, but always good to have a refresher. But that would be Jeff O'Brien's recommendation from this at a minimum. And then, I don't want to, I hesitate to use the word optional on this, but I think that those would be the required people that have to be in that training. And then if others wanted to join on, I think that would be hugely beneficial. But I think as long as we've got the guardrails between the committee leaders and the staff that's capturing the notes, and we'll actually be doing keeping people accountable, that will be the minimum.
Yeah, no, I don't like the word optional either. So I completely agree with you, Jeff. So what Mariah and I will do, we'll talk about how we bring this work and this training forward to this group. And then obviously there'll be expectation that every committee does it with their teams as well. So we'll come back on that one, but this is going to be front and center for us in the next couple of weeks as a steering. I think we have to lead by example on this one, the steering committee, before we get in front of the other committees and expect them to do it. So, all right, more to come around that. Anything else?
Lead and commit to it. It's not just leading by example, it's committing and being intentional in the work as well. That's how you achieve equity.
Okay. Next item on the agenda, this is the last piece, and that's just making sure we kind of cover off on a few administrative items. So there's a slide, Andrea, that and you all have seen a version of this before. I think we just fine-tuned it just a bit since the last time we spoke. And it talks about the governance structure. There's it's 3 boxes. Whoever's driving the slides, it shows the co-sponsors and co-chairs, steering committee, Louisville Downtown Revitalization Team. It's one slide.
Was that from last meeting's pre-work?
No, I sent a new one to, I think Andrea. Is Andrea still on?
I'm back.
Okay.
It's in the pre-work packet. It's that second to last.
Yep. I want to throw it up on the screen. Whoever's driving the slides on the screen, if we could put it back, if we could put it up there on the shared screen. Do we have it?
Yeah, we're working on it just a second.
Okay. All right.
Tisha's gonna let me share my screen and I'll bring it up.
While we're doing that, I'll just talk to it really quickly. So again, what we talked about was having one group that's responsible for just making sure we're organizing the work. So that's going to be the executive sponsors and co-chairs. So that's Jeff, Rebecca, Mariah, and I. We're playing that role, and we're not in the role of making critical decisions as much as just making sure we're staying organized. This group, the slides are coming up here in a second. Hold on. Here we go. Yep, this is it. This slide here, structuring ourselves. So these are the three groups, co-chairs and sponsors. Really, that group is responsible for administrative oversight, governance, ensuring we're meeting our timelines and organizing the work. So that's, as I mentioned, Jeff, Rebecca, Mariah, and I to really play that role. The steering committee obviously is this group, very important body to really guide the committee work, highlight key topics that we absolutely have to address, bring topics, agenda items to the broader LDRT, Louisville Downtown Revitalization team, and this shapes the overall planning directionally. So that's the steering committee, and we'll come up with the cadence on how often we're going to meet. I think as we start to kind of shift from planning to the committee work, a lot of these meetings are going to be focused on what the committees are doing, kind of what's happening, making sure the work is integrated, making sure it's integrated from an inclusion and diversity and equity perspective, making sure there's not overlap or redundancy. So the kind of what we talk about here in this group is going to evolve just a bit. And then you have the Louisville Downtown Revitalization team. That's going to be next week. Developing the content of the plans. They're going to be responsible for setting meaningful goals. You heard Mariah talk about the SMART goals. So making sure we do have tangible goals that we can look back on and reflect and make sure we're actually going to, we have things that can really kind of measure whether or not we're moving the needle with regards to revitalization of downtown, bringing thought leadership ideas to the table, and then ultimately accountable for the deliverable per the charter. And quite frankly, look, the steering committee and the co-chairs and sponsors are a part of the Louisville Downtown Revitalization team. So, each of the folks in the two boxes on the left are also a part of the third box there on the right. So either way, I just wanted to kind of talk about the three kind of, teams that are going to be focused on bringing this to life, and hopefully that makes sense. And we'll have a cadence around when the steering committee meets and a cadence around when the Louisville Downtown Revitalization team meets as well. Okay. I did want to talk a bit about how often we want to meet as a group, because obviously all of you all have other very important roles and your calendars are full, but it's going to be important for us to meet on a regular cadence so we can continue to push the work along. I think right now we've been kind of meeting every other week on average since we kicked this off. That feels right to me in terms of us coming together, but I wanted to kind of get a reaction from the group so we can start to put time in people's calendars, reserve the time. And so just any reactions from the group on how often we need to come together to make sure we're keeping towards the charter and meeting the goal here.
What is the plan for the broader group? How frequent for the broader group?
So that's another good, so I was thinking for the broader group, to me, because a lot of the work's going to be in the committees, right? So when the steering committee meets, committee leaders are going to pull up with their committees and talk. So we have a meeting with the broader group next week, but then after that, it's like, well, from there, it's going to be a lot of committee work, right? I think we should probably answer both of those questions. I mean, you can make an argument that they could meet, that could be once a month, and that there's a meeting that we have in March, a meeting that we have in April, and one that we have in May. But really, that group is going to be really the purpose is for them to really do the committee work. So I think bringing them together from time to time to provide an update to them on kind of what's happening in other committees is important for awareness and connectivity. But that, in my mind, could be potentially once a month, right? But because they got the once a month group meeting, but really we want them to be focused on the committee work, right? So, but that's Douglas and kind of my idea there. But I'm open.
One thing that I've seen work well is the idea of sort of nesting the committees into a larger gathering. I know the calendaring can be tricky, but if you could essentially have a general session, you know, kind of maybe for general matters, right? And then work into breakouts so that the steering committee, so the committee members are actually working in their committees for most of their time. You know, to the extent that you can bring those together in one scheduled slot, you know, it enables you to get both things done. I know that would mean sort of scheduling the committee's work to sort of be synchronized, which can be hard, but I've seen it done very effectively, at least with our strategic planning, with the Louisville Health Advisory Board, other kinds of venues.
Thanks, Ted. Anyone else have any thoughts around it? It's going to be your time, it's your calendar. So, I mean, I want to, before we start making commitments on people's calendars, I want you to have a chance to weigh in because we're all busy.
I like Ted's suggestion simply because it does make sure that we're all moving together down the road doing this. And I think that that's important since time is of the essence, since this is supposed to be a quick action plan kind of deal.
Okay. All right. Well, how about Ted? What I'll do is I'll kind of take what you said there, try to, you know, put it back in front of this group via email and just kind of go in that direction. I think really what I would like to do is just go ahead and put the meeting invites. And again, I'm not going to do it for the committees. Committees will do that, but these broader kind of group meetings, put those in folks' calendars and go ahead and kind of reserve the date. So, okay.
And I'd be happy to work with you if you want any help.
Yeah,
on
yeah.
that.
No, Ted, would you mind maybe kind of drafting kind of maybe how kind of what you suggested there, kind of drafting that and just sending it to, you know, Mariah, Jeff, Rebecca, and I, and then we can take that and perfect. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm happy to have one less thing to do, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it'd be great if you could add the other Rebecca as well, since we do downtown 24/7, 365.
Yeah, I don't think I have your email address. Kidding.
Okay. And then the last thing that I had was the agenda for the Downtown Revitalization Committee or team meeting for next week. This will be like really the first time we're going to get a chance to get in front of them with really a lot of content that really kind of sets the tone of what we're going to be doing for the next 3 months or so. What I wanted to cover with them, and again, this is an idea. It would be, you know, helping them understand kind of how we got to the committee structure. So probably share some of the slides I shared in the previous meeting in terms of how we kind of put things in the various buckets, things that are out of scope because they're more long-term versus things that the city's going to be focused on versus the committees. So just trying to walk them through that. The committee structure and description, we want them to sign up for various committees. Talk about how we're going to make sure inclusion, diversity, equity is core, central through everything that we do, everything that we plan for, and how we're going to hold ourselves accountable. So I want to talk about that. I think, you know, that Rebecca, the conversation you teed up around the budget, you know, let me know if that works for you to just give people transparency into what the city is committed to. The committee sign-up process, just letting them know. I think we'll probably have an email that goes out about that, my guess, probably preemptively, but it's probably good to kind of walk through that. And then kind of Ted, you know, kind of what you're going to be working on, kind of that meeting cadence and kind of how we're going to stay connected and work together. So so that was going to, you know, I think that group needs to know that, understand that. But if there's anything else we should talk about with that group, put it out there.
Sounds good to me.
Everyone loves that. Okay. All right. So let me just go through just some notes I took here because I want to make sure everyone feels like if there was something that we said we were going to circle back on and address as an action item, that you don't feel like it got lost in the conversation here. So the first one I had here was just making sure that you know, Tawana, you had an idea around the volunteers and making sure that we're thinking about how do we harness the energy that people have to actually go implement. and kind of what do we do with that? Is that kind of a phase 2? Is that, 1A? I don't know, but we need to do something with that. We need to think about that. And we want to kind of tap into individuals who don't want just want to plan, they actually want to do. So we'll think about that a bit more, and we can talk about that at our next steering committee meeting. Councilman talked about how do we think about the verbiage that we use for the retail and restaurant business, kind of that committee that's focused on retail, restaurant. Let's make sure there's a focus on local, and there's words and nomenclature that focuses on local. So we'll make that change. We'll make that modification as well. We talked about making sure that we have a body that's accountable for inclusion, diversity, and equity. Councilman said that he would take leadership of that. If anyone has an interest in helping him with that, please reach out to him so that we have the right folks who are passionate about it, just holding us all accountable on ensuring that the final document includes that. We talked about the training, making sure this group goes through the training, the committees go through the training early, and making that a priority. So we want to make sure we do that. Ted, you're going to work on, I think, just making sure that we bring these committees together in the right cadence with the right governance around how we kind of talk and communicate and stay connected. So you'll send us a note around how you want to do that, and we'll make sure we kind of bake that into how we hold ourselves accountable and communicate. I had a note down here around fair housing assessment, and someone we talked about a fair housing assessment, and my note here is not complete here. I know there was a conversation around that. What did we mention around that?
I believe that it was Rebecca Matheny who mentioned using the words affordable housing. Jeff O'Brien has done a fair housing assessment. That might be something we want to share with the team. I think that might be helpful information.
Corey, do you have something you want to say?
Yes, I was just going to ask, and I don't want to derail the conversation. We can have it another time if we need to, but does technology, automation, like downtown pivoting into a different purpose, does that live anywhere currently on any of the committees? Because I know it was a concern of Louisville Forward and your biggest challenges coming out of 2020. You identified even if just 10% of office space was lost, we would lose a few blocks of occupants downtown. So I'm just wondering if automation lives anywhere on any of these committees and the concerns and threats around that.
I don't think it does, and I think the thinking there was that would be a longer term challenge that needs to be addressed, that goes beyond the charter. Not to say it's not important, it just kind of fell outside the scope, but it's a great point. It was just more about the scope of what we're being charged to do here more in the short term.
I'd like to pile onto the councilman's thought, and that is the one thing that maybe is missing here is maybe some technical assistance on the public health restrictions and even the perceptions of public health safety as a technical resource to all the committees. So it just happens to be something I do for my day job. So, maybe everything looks like a nail, but it's great to come up with a plan, but I think most of the folks on the committee are used to the world being normal or the world being locked down. The truth of the matter is we work every day with the state, the governor's office on really what the current situation is, right? It has a lot to do with the vaccine rollout, but it's much more than that. It's what people feel safe and comfortable doing. And so I happily volunteer. I would just suggest all these committees might benefit from having that lens to look through to say, we're not all going to go to a basketball game anytime soon, right? So that idea is not something that's going to happen soon. There are many ideas that can happen soon. And I think having, again, some of that help, just a little guidance, what ideas are likely early things that can happen and what things are maybe later things might be something to put into the work. Just again, like a resource that any of the committees can ask questions to. I'm not offering myself. I mean, it could be whatever, Sarah Moyer, whatever the right answer is.
There is somebody here from Public Health. Gabrielle Gasaway is on the steering committee, but I think you're always so good at offering up yourself. I think that's a great perspective to look through, especially for the events committee, talking about the ways that we want people to come downtown and bring people together.
Well, and even for people returning to offices, I mean, I think it's a broader or transit. I mean, there's a number of places.
That's true.
Right.
I'm happy to be that resource in lieu of Dr. Moyer.
Great.
And just to remind everybody, you know, every downtown in America is dealing with this. So we have a lot of resources there as well.
Yep.
And question, going back to automation, and maybe I could just talk to the Rebeccas after this. I want to understand the balance between like the long term that will definitely impact everything we do versus we need to work on this in the short term because we only have a few months. I would hate for us to revitalize downtown, and best case scenario, everything gets complete and finished and downtown is flourishing. And then 2030 hits and half of downtown is totally useless because of automation, because of production jobs and retail jobs and food services just totally changing. So I want to make sure that doesn't get lost, but I can talk with one of the Rebeccas about that.
Okay. Great point. Okay. Well, look, I know we got just 1 minute left here, so we'll wrap it up and adjourn. So what we'll do is we will make sure that we get an agenda out to the broader committee here, or the Louisville Downtown Revitalization team here in the coming days. And also the notes that we have here, we'll make sure we make the modifications that we need. And this will also set the tone for our next steering committee meeting coming up probably in the next couple of weeks here. So appreciate the time, the conversation, and the passion around a really important topic for our city. So thank you very much, and we will be talking soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.